Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Phuphanich. He's a principal technologist at AWS. Sean, good to have you back.
Hey, thank you.
And here we are, midway almost through 2025 calendar year, halfway through the fiscal year, and still federal agencies dealing with zero trust. So at this point in history, what do you see in dealing with agencies, what their principal challenges are these days in the zero trust journey?
Well, the push for zero trust has gotten stronger, but at the same time, I see them dealing with a lot of different challenges. A big part of that comes from things like just the immense breadth of government, right? All the different teams, all the different departments, the technical debt. But even within an individual agency, you have a lot of these same challenges. And so one of the things the DoD has done is focus on pilots. So they have like 18 pilots for this year. And that basically proves whether or not you can achieve your zero trust goals, but then you have to be able to scale that across hundreds of teams, thousands of workloads. And that's really where a lot of the stumbling blocks come into play, because then you're dealing with a lot of different teams, different environments, different tools. And if you're talking about outside of the cloud, then there's a lot of new infrastructure that comes into play.
All right, and with respect to the cloud then, zero trust takes on a new dimension in the cloud. How does that make it different than when all the devices are connected to the same place?
Yeah, so if you look at the cloud, it was originally built as this on-demand resource. It's very consistent, so it's built off of APIs and services. And so you don't get all this diversity that you get when you're managing, data centers across 5,000 locations and stuff like that. So in a lot of ways, it makes the planning much simpler because you have a kind of a perfect representation of what you need to plan against. And the ability to scale on demand means you're not having to go through these massive procurement cycles. So, for example, one of the challenges we saw was, okay, now I have this application that I want to, apply the zero trust framework on. I want to reach my, for example, DoD target level. And you can't just take all this new infrastructure and new tools and connect it in a production environment. You got to build out this DevSecOps pipeline. You've got to be able to test it, and then you've got to be able to deploy it consistently from your dev environment into staging and into production. And so if you're trying to do something like that across all your applications at once, you're talking about potentially doubling or even more, the size of your infrastructure. So that's not very efficient. And then if you don't do that, then you're talking about just bottlenecking based on that additional infrastructure capacity that you have. And so cloud lets you kind of bypass a lot of these constraints that you would typically have on-prem, and it's just not as much of a concern.
And how does this look, say, from a deployment standpoint? Because the saying goes nowadays, the cloud service providers ensure that the cloud is secure, but the customer has to still maintain responsibility for its own data and applications because they're the ones controlling identity and access and so forth. The cloud really can't control that. So how does that interaction work?
That's what we call our shared responsibility model. So security of the cloud is the responsibility of the cloud service provider. But security in the cloud, monitoring your environments, setting up your identity, protecting your devices, all of that is going to be the responsibility of the customer. And so that's where a lot of these extra tools come into play that aren't an inherent part of the cloud services.
So you have to make sure that your SIEM and your access and identity management and all those things are in place. And also the devices, which are going to access either on-premises instances of applications or cloud ones, they have to have the zero trust and untrusted quality, if you will, inherent in them. Otherwise, anybody can get into the cloud as they would.
All of these traditional security tools will come into play, and it's easier to deploy those on the cloud because, again, you're not having to manage a lot of extra infrastructure, and you have a lot of additional things like infrastructure as code that make that something that's very easy to repeat across a number of different workloads and environments.
Right, and earlier you said that the experiments work pretty well and people can set up zero trust kinds of test pilots. DoD has 18 of them. How does the cloud, and how does AWS, we should say, really help people speed up the scaling so that they have an enterprise-wide zero trust posture?
Yeah, so this is actually where I dedicate a lot of my time right now. So as a principal technologist, I'm focused on solving big problems for industry. And so one of the ones we want to help solve is zero trust for government. And so one of my tasks was to take a look at this, not just as a service or a feature, but holistically. How are customers going through this challenge of adopting zero trust architecture? What are the problems? Where's the friction? And so when you have an opportunity to look at it like that, your tool set is more than just a hammer and a nail, right? You really get to explore all the things that customers need. And in this case, it has led to a lot of partnerships. So AWS, we've been able to improve a lot of our services to align with the zero trust needs of government. But we've also found as we look at the security needs of customers that we have a lot of great partners that really help fulfill those needs. Because I don't want to see this as just simply a compliance exercise or a checkbox. I mean, the ultimate goal of government is to meaningfully improve security outcomes. And so if you only do that at a checkbox level, then you have a big chance of kind of missing that opportunity.
You often hear the statement that zero trust is an architecture and a state. It's not really a technology or a product. On the other hand, all these companies come involved as partnerships. Tell us the importance of these companies. What do they do, and how do they interact? Are they interacting directly with the federal agency, or are they Amazon partners that together bring something that's abstracted to the government that helps them get to zero trust?
Zero trust principles and zero trust architecture are a little different, right? In particular, where I focus is on zero trust architecture. That's where technology has the best chance of solving the challenges there. And we work with a lot of partners like CrowdStrike, Zscaler, Splunk, Wiz, to basically address all of the different pillars of the DoD's zero trust framework, as well as CISA's zero trust maturity model when we're talking about federal civilian agencies. And so what we did is we decomposed all of their architecture and requirements down to commercially available tools, right? So a SIEM, a SOAR, multi-factor authentication, federated identity, that kind of stuff. And then we looked at how we as AWS could serve those functions, and then we also looked how the partners that operate on AWS serve those functions. And going back to, can we check the boxes for the requirement, but can we also provide the best capability in terms of leading to a stronger security outcome for customers?
All right, so then those companies are part of, you might say, an ecosystem really for all of this.
They're security partners with AWS. They don't just run exclusively in cloud, so many of them are also used in data centers around the world. And so it makes an easy transition for customers to be able to say, I want to be able to operate in my data centers, I want to be able to operate on AWS, and I want a consistent way to manage my security.
Right, in the age of efficiency, then, that would be a boon if the same tool is operating wherever you need it to operate. That would save acquisition costs and also save training and learning curve time.
Yeah, you get the economies of scale. You can negotiate your pricing better. Absolutely, the training is a big part of it. If you think about the cultural side of zero trust, getting people to believe in the stronger security outcomes and actually take the time to learn the tools and how to use them effectively is a big part of that.
And by the way, how do you see the trends in mobile devices with respect to their use with enterprise applications? I mean, it's kind of become de facto that most consumer internet traffic now, the bulk of it, is by mobile devices. But that's very different than communicating with enterprise applications for the government.
Yeah.
What are the trends that?
Bring your own device is a big topic. It is a challenging space. So there are a lot of things we can do to improve the security of mobile devices. However, there are some things that you can't control. I mean, the news has been very quick to point out that the challenges around mobile devices is real. So there are certain levels of security that you may not want to bring to that area.
And from your standpoint, how is the progress of the commercial cloud industry in getting higher and higher levels of security, not just from a technical standpoint, but in having customers believe that IL5, IL7, high-level FedRAMP and so forth is really there and they can have that faith?
I think what works best for us is our record, right? So not all clouds are the same, but I would say AWS's record on security has been extremely strong. We design really from the ground up with security in mind. And looking at the federal customers that have adopted cloud and adhered to FedRAMP High and FedRAMP Moderate, they've been able to operate securely.
And as we talk about security, agencies are also focusing on the bigger question of modernizing their infrastructure, modernizing their applications, all of their IT. How does cloud and zero trust fit into the modernization picture?
Well, zero trust in itself is a security modernization. And so when you look at taking things that are on-prem today, trying to make it more efficient, trying to make it more consistent, cloud gives you a potential way to do that. Because everything is services-based and API-based, it allows you to get that consistency that's very difficult to do when you have a lot of disparate data centers and teams and things that have built up over time. So as you look to modernize, what are your objectives? You want to be more secure. You want to be more resilient. You want to improve efficiency and performance. And so looking at zero trust at the same time as modernization becomes really important, because if you look at some of the highest defined levels of zero trust, like DoD Advanced, in some cases you will have to modernize an application in order to meet that. And so it becomes a really critical part to look at both of those, but also decide what are your priorities in that modernization program. And for, I think, a lot of the government right now, security is really top of mind.
And you've got some specific programs that address that whole nexus.
We have a new program called the Zero Trust Accelerator for Government, and is a little bit of what I was talking about earlier. Is we have tried to solve these different challenges for government customers, and so we built a lab to actually experience, what is it that they're going to run into. We're telling them, hey, we've got all these great partners. You can mix and match. You can use whoever you want. But then, what does that really mean when you actually get down to it? And so we did. We initially saw challenges in our lab in getting everyone integrated and coherent and leading to those stronger security outcomes. And so we worked on it. And so we worked with partners. There is the OCSF schema framework that we launched in 2023, which basically standardized the security data schema across over 200 of our partners that we work with. So, for example, your identity layer and tools will be able to transmit information that your other layers will be able to understand. And so when you're going through your analytics later, you'll be able to tie those back from identity, device, network, applications, etc. And then we also took it a step further, and as we were running into challenges with integrating different partners, we worked with those partners to actually build improvements. And so for someone to now do that today, they have a much easier experience getting those partners, like I talked about, CrowdStrike, Okta, Zscaler, Splunk, and they'll be able to achieve their actual security outcomes faster and easier, because they're spending less time trying to mix and match data and integrate partners that weren't originally designed to. And just be able to move forward with those.
Yeah, that's really an important part of the whole zero trust journey then, is just being able to integrate the different specific tools you have. I mean, it's kind of an age-old problem, but you can really bring it together in service of zero trust, sounds like.
Yeah, that's a really big part of it. Being able to recenter, everything in your universe around identity. That was the big challenge that we were able to help.
And maybe discuss the idea of identity doesn't just apply to human-operated devices, because there's so much automated, especially in this AI area, and the agentic type of approach to AI that's coming in. Lots of things are drawing on resources that need to be zero-ly trusted, if you will.
Yeah, the space for AI and zero trust is still evolving. A lot of AI today is treated as kind of a standard workload, but as it evolves quicker than anything I've ever seen, that becomes a focal point for us to address.
All right, and where do you think this is all headed? I mean, what will this look like when they'll never settle down, but say, 18 months from now, a couple of years from now, do you think zero trust will still be a pursuit?
I think it will, in the sense that security is always evolving, right? So as threats evolve, defense will evolve. And so what the government has done is basically set not a final destination, but certainly some points of interest along the way, reaching a minimum standard across government to, again, improve overall security outcomes. And so I think it'll take them a few years to get there. And then I think the next wave of need will come. In particular, at the speed that AI is developing, that is going to become important on both the discovery and defense in security, because threat actors are already using AI, and they'll continue to use it in new ways, in ways that actually help accelerate their attack timelines. And so we now need to be able to respond at a speed faster than any human could, at a scale faster than any human could. You already see some of that baked into the zero trust framework, but I think it's something that will continue to mature.
Yeah, your comment about recentering around identity is really crucial here, because sometimes people are fighting the last war. And one of your partners, I think, commented that the methodology of getting into corporate resources when you have nefarious aims is not hacking anymore, programming your way in. It's simply grabbing identities and using stolen identities to get into whatever resource you're trying to hit. And so that gets back to that idea of identity and the fact that there needs to be an evolution in identity to be able to make it subject to safety, even if it's stolen at some point.
The consistency is the challenge, especially as you have all these different disparate applications and pieces of infrastructure. Making sure that they all adhere and require that identity is really where you see that initial challenge. But once you achieve it, it goes a long way in helping you actually protect your organization. But the other interesting part about zero trust is it doesn't just presume external threats. There's also internal threats, or sleeper agents, if you will. And so part of it is the analytics in AI that's able to identify behavior as it changes. So you have someone that is operating normally, doing their job, accessing the information they need, and then at some point in the timeline, they start looking for vulnerabilities. They start looking for things they wouldn't normally need to access. They start looking for ways to move that data somewhere that is less secure than their normal environment.
It strikes me that zero trust is, while it's a state, it is something that you never stop pursuing with each new generation of technology, each new application. It's almost like a state of being painted. Every time you put a new house up, it's got to be painted. And so there's never really any point at which there's stasis here, is there?
I think there will always be some kind of catch-up point or milestone. I think that's what we're seeing today. But a couple of years from now, when that milestone is achieved, there may be a whole new round of things that need to be considered.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us. My guest today has been Phuphanich, a principal technologist at AWS. Always great to have your insight.
All right. Thank you.
And I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You've been listening to Accelerate Together, Zero Trust. For more on this series, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search AWS.